All right. Welcome to the podcast. This is the No Fucks Given podcast with your host, Will Cordingley and Ryan Perry. We're here to talk about living an authentic life, transforming yourself, and let's sum it up as being more content more of the time than not so much the opposite of that. And today we're talking about turning the pandemic into lemonade. And what the hell is that all about, Ryan? What are we going to do here?
That is a great question. If only I knew. So thank you for that great
Mhm.
introduction. It's something new for us. We're trying out on just what is this, our third episode of the No
Lucky
Fucks
number
Given.
three.
Yep, number 3. And well, the idea was yours. We were going to continue on from last week, kind of talking about, as Americans getting weak and, kind of looking
Mhm.
at where we're at post-pandemic. And then with the nature of the show being living your authentic life was kind of like, okay, how on topic was that? And how can we kind of, bring it back on topic as far as making it really about life improvement, like you
Mhm.
said, how can you actually live happier? Is that even an option for you? Especially post pandemic. Here we are, we're rolling into June in 2021 and summertime, folks. Memorial weekend just happened. It's time to get out there, have some fun, but I'm sure some people are struggling.
I mean, guy, in America, it's starting to feel like we're approaching the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, the coronavirus still rages worldwide in India. And in America, we just put out a travel advisory to Japan right before the Olympics start up because it's
Right.
getting real bad over there. So
Yeah. But
it's
at the same
when
time,
I think,
I've got a friend that went to an event that was hosted by a hospital that was in person.
yeah.
They actually had a group gathering indoors with food and drinks. Granted, masks were still required and those types of things.
Mhm.
Locally, we've got some places up here in Sonoma County that they're like, hey, we've got live music. They've started live music. Some larger venues are starting to put
Mhm.
things together. So, as far as living your authentic life, I think some people, the reality is everybody reacts differently. So I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, and I kind of feel like I land in this side of it, that COVID was actually
Mhm.
kind of a blessing in some ways. It forced me to deal with some things that maybe if I wasn't forced to deal with them, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so I think my life is better in certain ways. And I'm not saying COVID, yay.
Yeah.
It's not what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying because of the situations that we were forced into, it gave new opportunities. And so when you have new opportunities, it's nice to have that option to say okay to something different. That's part of living
Yeah.
your authentic life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a bit of what we talked about last week and kind of what we're going to go deeper on and continue with this week is forced catalyst, man. Like,
Right.
um, for me, I don't know if I'd call it, I don't know if I'd call it a blessing, but man, a lot changed for me. I lost 25 pounds. I moved twice, as we talked about, a
Right.
lot of big changes. And, my romantic relationship of almost 2 years came to an end. So it was
Mm,
like, turning the heat up on everything just speed things up to a certain degree, this forced catalyst
right.
phenomena.
Right.
And in terms of how that ties in with softening or being untested, I think that's still, in my opinion, that's still unfolding.
Oh,
It's like
definitely.
when the history books are written decades from now, it'll be much clearer. We're just kind of trying to see what can we scrap from it now that turns into a positive in our lives, even
Hmm.
though things might be really negative. Some people have been horribly impacted in ways that probably will never leave them. So
Right.
it's a crazy time.
Yeah. Yeah. And the great thing is, though, we live in a time where we have tools that we can actually work through, deal, and it's interesting. One of my big aha moments that it's just seems like so basic, but if you never think about it, you just don't know. And that is when you have anxiety about something, let's say it's flying or fear of snakes, so you can get into phobias and those types of things. It's not
Hmm.
the actual, and I'm just going to use the snake as an example because I think a lot of people are familiar with it. It's not the snake itself that is causing the reaction. It's the images and the stories that the unconscious, subconscious mind is creating about the
Hmm.
future interaction between you and the snake that is
Yeah.
causing that. And we don't, as humans, we don't realize that this is going on, but it kind of makes sense because I remember working with somebody who had such a strong fear of snakes that if she saw it in a magazine, she would literally throw the magazine down.
Yeah. And
And
probably pull her head back like you just
yeah,
did too.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it was that visceral of a reaction. And it's because of what's going on in here that was causing
Yeah.
that. It was creating its own movie. And by
Yeah.
changing the movie, the interpretation of what that snake means, you can then change the effect. and
Absolutely.
that doesn't relate just to phobias. It can relate to all kinds of things, relationships, pandemics, you know,
Yeah.
across the
Changing
board.
them. If we change the meaning of the pictures, that changes things sometimes
Right,
too. And if you change the pictures internally, that changes things pretty radically. So
right.
it's interesting. I mean, I think this, that's a kind of basic neurolinguistic programming. I think that's starting to become more and more mainstream since
Hmm.
the 70s. That seems to be that's catching on, that people are starting to see a bit that we almost operate like we're projecting a movie in our own minds and in our
Right,
own consciousness. And we might be the director and the editor and the everything of that movie, which is a very powerful stance to have.
right.
And in terms of, let's say, I don't know this woman, but if she's going out in the world scared that snakes are in every corner or behind every door, if something like that is happening, if you have that kind of generalized anxiety about it, actually knowing where the snake is really, 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 really useful for
Hmm.
her, instead
Right,
of it just being this ghost that comes up everywhere. And the
right.
pandemic operated like that in a certain way for a lot of people. Some people, if you're just kind of anxious generally, which I may know a lot about, and I think way more people in the world do than may even realize,
Right.
having this scary enemy thing, whatever you want to call it, called COVID or the pandemic, brought a lot of stuff into focus and cleared it up, actually, which is, I think, why some people were able to make some changes or just do things that they weren't able to do, was that being under threat, things become clear to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Not
And
that
I'm
it has to be that way, but that's what's been happening. And it's just interesting to look at.
right. Yeah. And gosh, I'm curious. And then you continued on and I lost my train of thought, but it was kind of that being anxious, how the pandemic kind of forced, uh, you recall what it was that you would say? You were talking about the pandemic and being kind of an anxious person and how it kind of allowed for change because it forced things. Was it just
If
processing
if
in your
you
mind or?
if you're generally anxious, being able to actually physically locate or pinpoint something to be anxious about
Mm,
is brings things into clarity a lot of time, because then your mind, the part of your brain doing fight, flight, or freeze or fawn and all these different things, actually knows what to get away from, and that it
okay.
can do that. Because if it's 5 feet away from me, if I go this way, I can get away from it. I can flee, or I can
Right.
fight something that exists.
Okay.
So it has a bit of that effect for some people, not for everyone.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I was
for a
curious
lot of people who are
because
kind of like, I don't know why, but I just started doing stuff that I've been meaning to do and it got better. Like, you hear that a lot.
yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with it. It's a lot of managers and leaders, CEOs and presidents and people like that, who are good in a crisis, but maybe not so good in good times, are the same way. When it's like,
Right.
when the chips are down and you're under crisis, that threat like powers down some stuff that gets in your way and powers up some stuff that brings out superpowers in you. So it has a bit of that phenomena for people.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was really kind of curious because I know early on, there were cases where people, they'd walk down the street and people would literally walk out into the street, to avoid these, the potential of walking next to somebody within a couple of feet, even though you're all masked up and those type of things, or people would
Yeah.
literally cross the street at times, and there was this concern, especially in the news, and I know I expressed it with my friends that what type of impact is this going to make as far as being fearful of people in general.
Hmm.
And so, kind of that anxiety, if you're anxious already and then you add this other level, it seems like some people, I perceived it as more people are becoming more anxious. And it's nice to hear that you've noticed that some people are becoming less anxious because maybe it freed up time and allowed them to reevaluate what's really important to them, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say less anxious. I would say if you're already that kind of way, it focused it in a way that might have been useful, or it could have gotten way worse. We're
All right.
speaking generally about almost 8 billion people. But for that phenomena, because I think we all know at least one person or a lot of people, or it could be us, who are just like, I don't know, I just started doing stuff that was good for me, or
Right.
made this thing happen, and it was good.
Yeah.
But certainly, I mean, and I remember that phase of the pandemic where it's like it just was unclear if walking by someone on the street could get you sick. It just
Right.
wasn't clear whether that was a true threat or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
Seeing San
That's
Francisco, like, you go
empty.
out on your one government approved walk a day and it's just you're the only person out.
Yeah.
That was a crazy phenomena. That
Yeah.
was wild.
Yeah.
So,
I remember I took a picture when they announced the shutdown. I was at my office and I drove during rush hour traffic. And it was like the next day or 2 days afterwards. It was like right in that neighborhood, though. There were no cars on the freeway. And I'm like, all right, this is the one thing Caltrans hadn't been able to fix in years on the 101.
yeah.
And here the pandemic was able to fix it, in a couple of months. So, uh, not the way we want to fix our traffic by any means. So, kind of getting back to the show title, as far as
Mhm.
how do we take this from lemons to lemonade, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
Or begin to just even
yeah.
just planning that frame in our minds could be just the movement for today, but
Hmm.
depends on who you are.
Right. And kind of noticing internally what's going on.
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of people that I know, for me, it's not something I ever really paid attention to until I got into NLP Marin. I was mid 40s by that time. Everything was taken care of up here as far as I was concerned, and not
Mhm.
realizing that there's the emotional side of things, that if we listen to what the body is trying to tell us through its ability to communicate to you emotionally, that actually means a lot and can give you a lot of direction on what to do or what not to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there's the deepest wisdom that comes from all these different places, right? Top down in your mind has its own incredible power and incredible frames and its incredible way to impact the world and create positive stuff. And from the bottom up, your body has this kind of unspoken feeling wisdom that, um, if you can tap into, oh my God, like, that there's the kind of seminal starting place book that anyone who's interested in trauma work and somatic stuff, The Body Keeps the Score, is where you should start with, that just to start learning about the essence and wisdom of the body. And I'm
Hmm.
sure we'll be talking a lot more about that in the future.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
today, I watched Fight Club last night to prepare for this.
You finally
Naturally,
did it, huh?
I tend to watch that movie every few years. It's one of those good ones that kind of just helps focus some things. I'm not totally. It's like, I don't think we should be living in the woods in a primal stance necessarily,
Right.
but it's good to try that on every once in a while, just to check yourself and stress test your own beliefs and your own stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a scene, if people remember it, where Tyler Durden goes in and basically takes a clerk hostage and puts a gun to his head, and it's like, Raymond K. Essel, what did you want to be when you grew up? And he's like, I don't know, he's freaking out because he has a gun to his head and he doesn't know why this guy's harassing him. And he's just like crying and can barely speak. And he's like, what did you want to be? Like, why did you go to school? And it's like, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but it was just too much school. And he's like, all right, I know where you live. I have your license. If you're not on a path to becoming a veterinarian in 6 weeks, you're dead. And he lets him run off. And it's this big mindfuck experiment, right? But it's kind of what the pandemic has done to all of us in a certain degree. Maybe not as dire, maybe not as intense,
or
but
it's allowed us to look at things a little differently, maybe.
It's this, I mean, we keep, at least when I look at it, it's like a forced reinvention. And I'm just gonna say it over and over, and if people get nothing from today, it's like the move right now is to just go with it, jump in the river and let it flow, let it take you. And what the hell does that mean, right? There's so much to that, but something's moving, something's changing. Like, we're living through history, and you can take the updates and you can kind of move towards more positive changes in yourself, or you can resist them, but that usually has really negative consequences down the road.
True. And it is a unique time in the sense that we were all forced into change for the most part. If we just think about it, even just in the United States as an example, it was universal that this is what you need to do. We don't want you outside, as an example, and we're not going to get into the politics and whether or not it was right or wrong, but it's the reality that most of us lived in, and we're affected in different ways. And it's interesting because with that, and of course the unknown that you talked about, if you know where the threat is, it typically is easier on the mind because it knows where to pay attention to. But we didn't know where the threat was initially. Was putting a mask on going to protect you? Those types of things. And so it seems like, because we universally were put into this collective, I thought it was a great opportunity for the United States and the world to kind of come together and go, okay, this is a way to universally band together against something, come together. But additionally, I think because we were forced into change, and we work in programs and we kind of get stuck in ruts as humans, and we kind of live the same life and do the same thing. It was like, oh, okay. I guess I can try something else because I'm having to try something else right now. People were buying bikes, exercise equipment was being sold out. People were like, apparently camping is the hot new thing. People are going out and they're going camping now. I hear some city folk have learned that camping's not for them. But it's kind of, it's allowed people to try new experiences.
Making sourdough bread.
Yeah, making sourdough bread. There you go. And
that became the thing.
And I think that's a wonderful thing anytime you have the ability to do that.
I agree. I mean, on kind of a enjoyment level, and it's starting, and this is where it's like, this might be premature and maybe we'll have to do an update, but we're kind of right in the beginning of what's totally predictable and people are talking about, is like, now we're trying to contend with maybe the potential of a labor shortage, and the potential of, as America opens back up, like fully, California's on track to do that in a few weeks from now at this point. But it's like, can companies force people to come back to work in an office when that has potential threats? Can they force people to get a vaccine that they may or may not want? I mean, these are really tough, challenging questions. And that's just more interesting to me than the point I'm trying to make, is that people are reevaluating what they want in their lives.
All right.
and they should. And it's like,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this.
it's scary as fuck, but it's like,
Yeah.
you gotta has this job been doing anything for you other
Right.
than giving you a paycheck? And if the answer is yes, that's awesome. But for a lot of people, it seems like the answer is no.
Right.
So that's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. So with that, there are people who I think it's fair to say are still struggling in some ways, or because they've got these new options and they're not really sure where to go, how to explore those type of things.
Hmm.
What, if you were going to work with a new client, and I know this is very general because you like to get specific to the individual's needs, but what would be some things you
Yeah.
might have them do to help identify what it is that's going to, help them make the right decision for themselves?
Whew, yeah, it's tough because they usually work so specifically on things. It's the only
Right.
way to really get at it. But if you're reevaluating your life, let me just feel into it for a second. If you're reevaluating your life right now in the face of like the pandemic and the economic shakeup and just how things have went, I would get out a piece of paper. And it's funny because I don't actually ever really do this with clients, but if you're alone and you're listening to this, I would get out a piece of paper and write down all the major contexts of your life. For example, like your health, your happiness, your wealth, your family, anything else that's important to you, like a major chunk of your life, these big things.
Hmm.
And I would just start breaking them down and notice if it's working for you and if it's not. And if it's not working for you, and this is really the unspoken crux of what I do and what Ryan does and what a lot of good change workers do, is teach people to make choices. It's like we help people
Right.
create the lives they want and create change so that that outcome unfolds. But it's really at the end of the day a meta learning about, can we make choices and see them come to fruition in
Right.
time, whether
And
that's fast or slow.
right. And would it
So,
be fair to say that you can make different choices? Because if the
well,
choices
yeah.
you've been making have gotten you here, which is fine because
Mhm.
you're here, and so yay for being here. And then two, what different choices can you make moving forward to get you where you truly want to be?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah, there was a guy
man, it's like, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say real quick, just because it's in a line with this. There was a
Mhm.
guy, he was on, I forget whose podcast. I was listening to him, and he finally got to the point in his life where he had hit rock bottom. He was living on his, I think he still had a car, so he's living out of a car. He's down in Southern California. Life is not good. And he decided to just do everything the opposite. So normally, if he goes, I would go somewhere, and if I'd go right to go wherever I was going, he goes, this day, I'm going to go left. I'm still going to get where I want to go. However, I'm not going to take the same path to get there because it's led to this point in his life today where he, emotionally finally hit rock bottom, and he goes, something's got to change. So he literally changed everything. And, like any good story, he was, rock bottom. Now he's multimillionaire, and I'm sure he's probably got family and kids and, all the things that he wants. But he literally just said, if all the decisions that I've made got me here and I'm not happy with it, then I need to make different decisions. And so he
Yeah.
literally did the opposite of what he thought he should do. And I'm that way with directions at times. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm out hiking on a trail. I'm like, okay, I think I need to go this way. And then I'm like, you know what? Knowing me, I typically choose the wrong path and it's really this way. So I actually do that sometimes. I'll go the other way that I don't think I should go. And most of the
Hmm.
times it is the correct way. So
Funny.
it's just interesting because it doesn't necessarily make logical sense to us. I think for most people, at least it didn't for me, until you
Hmm.
understand how the mind works and the patterns that are actually trying to protect us. So there's that unconscious protection. However, that unconscious protection is not really serving us where we're at in our life now, and kind of overriding the natural programming that's in place in our mind
Yeah.
that has a positive intent, but isn't serving us well. And we could have a
Well,
whole conversation on that one of these days. I think that's a great
uh,
topic to talk about,
I'm sure
because
we will, because I think
yeah, because
about
how
it a
many
lot.
people do you know get in the spiral where they're like, oh, I really dislike that I do this, and then I go and I do it, and then they become self-defeating on themselves, and they
Yeah.
don't understand the programming that's going on behind all that.
Yeah. And to be able to create change in your life that you can lean into, you have to be able to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And if you continually find yourself following your intuition and it leads you to the same bad places, this is the topic. It's like, how do you know the difference between pattern trauma response and like true intuition?
Hmm.
Because they can kind of feel the same sometimes. And man, that's a complicated, messy one. So I would love to tackle that, because I don't even know what to say about that other than it's usually custom for everyone,
Yeah.
but
But
if
I
you
think
can't
if you
trust
can,
yourself, you're really screwed. I want so
right.
what's
But I
that?
think a
It
lot of
almost sounds
times,
like
go ahead.
well, it sounds like when you're talking about the trail, you're like, you can trust that you can't trust your sense of direction. That's an
Right.
interesting experience. What's that
Right.
like?
Yeah. It can be confusing sometimes, especially when
Uh-huh.
it's like, okay, I know for sure it's got to be this way. But years ago, I used to mountain bike all the time up in Annandale with a buddy of mine. And it got to the point where just for fun, he'd go, hey, Ryan, where's the lake? Because you'd go up in the mountains and there's a lake that was it's not in the center of the park, but the park's big enough that we'll say it's in the center of the park. And
Mhm.
it's over there. He goes, nope, it's over here. So he did it, kind of out of joking, but literally and after a couple of years, I figured out the terrain enough to know that.
Mhm.
But it's if you're not aware of it, right? So if I never became aware of the fact that my sense of direction might be 180 degrees off, as a
Mhm.
broad generalization, if I was never aware of that, then I'm always going to go down the path, and a lot of times it's going to be wrong, and then I'm going to get upset. I'm going to go, damn it, this is the
Okay.
way it was supposed to be, and why, every time this always happens to me, and then you start, it's all that self-defeating. Oh, I'm so stupid. It's unique for everybody, versus being able to go, you know what? It just seems like a lot of the time, if I say go this way, it's not the right way. And if I was a
Hmm.
gambling man, maybe I wouldn't bet on that way, but I would bet on a different direction. So even kind of getting back to your
Okay.
calibration, become aware that maybe your calibration's a little off, and try and recalibrate. Even phones. My phone at times will tell me I need to recalibrate the GPS. It's not the GPS, but whatever. Yeah,
The
I guess it's the
compass.
GPS, the compass. Thank you.
Hmm.
I have to do this wiggly woggly thing, and it
Uh,
recalibrates the compass so that it's pointing true north. So
well, there's a metaphor. Look at that.
there you go. There you go. So I think a lot of times
Yeah.
just having awareness, and I think it's one of the things that I'm excited about this show, is kind of shining a light on different areas in our lives that we fall into patterns as humans.
Hmm.
And it's like, the goal of the show is not to fix anybody. The goal of the show is to kind of help and give you a different perspective to kind of
Hmm.
look at things so you can start moving towards living your authentic life.
Yeah, I would say hopefully at some point, piece by piece, we'll point people in a direction that nothing needs to be fixed, because we were always doing the best that we knew how to do and that
Yeah.
was available. So
Right.
making new choices about the future that's the jam. That's the skill of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And not beating ourselves up so bad about the things that, could have gone differently.
Right.
Which is, I mean, man, that's tough to do. That's a
That's
pretty
Yeah.
pretty human thing to do, but still you have to ask yourself, how useful is it? Some
Right.
people find it a good motivation strategy. I haven't observed that to be all that accurate, but
Right.
who knows?
Right. But there's other people that, they were told by their whoever, may it be a family member or whoever was of authority, that you'll never amount to anything. And so they used that and leveraged that energy and,
Yeah,
drove really hard. Doesn't mean they're happy. They might be quote unquote successful, but it doesn't
yeah,
mean they're happy. So,
yeah. We could definitely do with a redefinition of what it means to be happy and successful, kind of
yeah,
in the modern day. Because yeah, the people who grew up with caretakers who said things like that usually end up, living out that prophecy, or they can blow out in the exact opposite direction.
right.
But if they don't work on themselves, if they don't examine themselves, they're just motivated by this like horrible monster.
Yeah,
As you said, that you can get a lot of material wealth and success and relational success even, and still feel completely empty and not
right.
great about it, which is like, God, what's even the point of that, in my opinion? It's
Right.
like,
Yeah. But there's so many people, and if you're not aware of it, because if you've always lived with so much pressure or so much drive or whatever, so much whatever it is in your system,
mhm.
that you're not able to calibrate what it's like to be with this much. We haven't really touched on that, but if you're, people when they get really upset, they're like, I've had it up to here. Well, if you're always here, but you don't realize it with life, with friends, with family, with whatever it is, with yourself, if you're
Mhm.
always up to here, it doesn't give you a lot of extra room, right, to cope and deal with other things versus
Yeah.
going, okay, maybe if we can bring it way down here. And I think that's part of also what the pandemic brought out. People that were living up here, they were like, okay, this is about as much stress, anxiety, fear, anger, whatever it is, frustration, pack all those different words in there. If they're up here,
Mhm.
that took them to the next level. And I think some people were like, it's not worth it. I went through that in my early 20s.
Really?
Fortunately. Yeah.
I mean, good for you for getting through it, because man, that reminds me of a really, really, really wonderful, one of my favorite quotes actually, by Soren Kierkegaard, where he said, "People settle for a level of despair that they can tolerate and call it happiness." And I think that's really what the pandemic did, was kind of put the metaphorical Tyler Durden gun to your head and be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, you don't have a choice not to look at the fact that you've just kind of made a nest of misery, as
Right.
opposed to like up leveling yourself towards your actualization and your potential and bringing it to that."
All right.
And that's tough, man. I mean, holy
Yeah.
shit, that
It
is
can be a
like
little
jarring.
a little bit of a mind fuck too, in the sense that, okay, this is actually serving you in some way also. This nest that you built of misery is actually serving
Mhm.
you, even though you're not happy.
Yeah, well, it's certainly served a function, but if
Right.
it drags on your mental and physical health, I'm more in a stance of moving through that. Because
Oh yeah.
if you're at a place and you've always been motivated by beating yourself up or being mad at the world or being mad at your family or your parents or whatever it is, like, you can have that without that kind of angry, resentful, away from motivation, because
Right.
you've made it happen in your life. The motivator may have been not the healthiest thing, but
Right.
you still know how to make that happen in your life if you work on it. There's a lot of fear, and you hear this. Stand-up comedy is my favorite artistic medium, so I watch a lot of stand-up. I listen to a lot of interviews with comics, and there's this theme that comes up a lot with them, because mental illness is very prevalent in stand-up comedy,
Hmm.
and so is like substance abuse. So a lot of them talk about they had this fear of getting sober that they wouldn't be funny anymore. I hear this a lot. It's fat. Like I was worried if I got sober, I just wouldn't be funny, and I'd
Mm-hmm.
lose my career and my money and my friends and every blah blah blah. And they get sober and they're still hilarious. And it's
Right.
like that's how life works. We can
Right.
have these things because it's bigger than who we are, not just kind of the painful way we got there. If that's
Yeah.
how it played out,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It reminds me of a couple, and it was an older couple. Not sure if they're retired or not, close to retirement. And the wife was really frustrated that the husband would have a Snapple every day. She's like,
Hmm.
why? They're like $3 at the store, and he has one every single day. And it's like, we don't need to be wasting that money.
Mm-hmm.
And the person talking to them is like, but your net worth is like $10 million. Y'all are not struggling at all, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But something in her mind felt that was wasteful, and that there was a potential of we're not gonna have enough money to get through our golden years if he keeps on drinking those Snapples. So
Yeah, it's good to they're back to it again, doing some reality testing, and right now, whether you like to or not. So that's take the update. I
yeah,
feel it in my bones that is the move.
yeah,
If you're part of the species, and you probably are if you're listening to this right now, the move is to, take the updates in your life, whatever that means.
right,
And it's
right,
vague on purpose because that's really different for everyone.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And did you get a chance to watch the fourth turning?
I did, and I am so glad you brought that up because I've been dying to talk about that. That is one of the most fascinating things I've seen. I love stuff like that. Do
do
you
do we need
mind?
to do a separate show just on it?
I think that'd be
Uh,
super interesting. We'd probably
yeah,
have to read the book, which I'm going to
yeah,
guess is pretty heady, but I'd be
probably.
up for that too if we
I
want
was
to.
I was
Do you want to tell
actually
people what it is a bit? Then we
Yeah,
can
well,
talk
then the
about
interesting thing before we get into that is
it.
I was talking to Steve Nobleton about it a couple of months
Mm,
ago. And he's like, "Oh, that's really fascinating," because he was watching or listening or read the book about this other philosopher who was stating that the issue right now is it's a leadership issue, and that we
mm,
just have it's weak leadership, and that's why we're in the struggle and those types of things. And when the new generation comes up with in leadership, it's going to be a stronger leadership, and that's going to help right the ship, if you will.
yeah,
If you
interesting.
presuppose that we're not necessarily floating well on the seas of life, as far as the United States, the world, there seems to be a lot going on. So he was like, that totally makes sense as far as what the fourth turning is, or the four turnings. Is it fourth turning? Well, we're in the fourth turning. So I
Mm.
don't have his name. I probably should have looked up his name. Um, Maybe you can do that real
Yeah, I'll
quick,
pull
Will.
that
I'll,
up
I'll
here.
pop
Yeah.
myself. So the fourth turning, it's a philosopher who kind of went back in history, and he noticed that every 80 years we go through, and this is specific to the United States. It kind of generalizes out a little bit, but approximately every 80 years we go through these cycles. And within these 80-year cycles, there are four turnings that are approximately 20 years apart. And that the first turning, or the first 20 years, is kind of where there's a lot of growth. Things are positive. We're moving towards, it's just life is good. Life is good. It's expansive. People are happier. Wealth is flowing. It's all good. The second turning, and I'm generalizing here because I watched a short video. I didn't read the
Mm.
book, but the second turning, things are they're starting to shift a little bit. Life is still good though, so people aren't too concerned, but there's this noticeable change. The third turning, it's kind of like, hey folks, has anybody noticed the ship is kind of sinking? It's like, it's not as bad as it could be, but we're kind of heading that way. Maybe we should do something about it. And then the fourth turning, or the last 20 years in this 80-year cycle, is, well, the ship is officially sinking. Things are not going well. People are not happy. Life is not as prosperous in general for people. And it's just kind of this downturning of the effect. And so when I read this, or I watched the video, it was a couple months ago, I'm like, oh crap. If we're just starting the fourth turning in 2020, and here I am coming up on 50, I'm going to be almost 70 by the time we get out of this. I'm like, this doesn't sound like much fun. But fortunately, he said it started back in 2008. Around 2008 is when we rolled into the fourth turning. So then I'm like, oh, okay, good. If we only have another 7 or 8 years of this, and then we run into a prosperous time, how exciting will that be? So that's what I have as far as the fourth turning.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Ryan, because that's the very, very big overhead of this thing that we just watched a quick 12-minute video about it that kind of explained the gist of it. And it ties into what we're talking about here with personal development, because it talks about this 80-year cycle and the cyclical nature of how history repeats itself in America, and where the book, asserts that we land is, we had the fourth turning, which is the chaotic bad one. I forget what they officially call it, started in 2008. And the book is called The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe, just in case anyone wants to look it up. God, I'll add it to the endless list of things that are fascinating and I want to dive into.
Yeah, definitely.
But
go ahead.
I always get interested in because there seems to be the ironclad rule that history repeats itself. We're doomed to repeat it if we don't understand it. And we seem to be really stalwartly interested in not understanding our history as a country and as a species, I would say. So we absolutely repeat things that are, in theory, totally preventable, but maybe it serves a purpose that we don't understand, a secondary payoff or something like that.
But look how hard it is for just one person to recognize that their patterning maybe isn't leading them to the path that they want, the happiness, the joy, those type of things. Then you try and get a whole community, and then you try and get a whole city or state, and then a whole country, and then a whole world to actually, have that awareness towards change. I think we'll get there. But it's probably, I don't know how many thousands of years down the road. Hopefully the species survives enough for us to start figuring that out at a larger scale.
Well, here's the thing. It goes a lot of ways, but it mainly goes one of two ways when people are confronted with or told or realize that they have the power in their lives. That's either the best news you've ever heard in your entire life, or it's a really, really, really guilty, scary, bad, shameful thing to hear. And it's really interesting that it goes in differently. But when you can claim your own power and like your birthright to make choices about who you are and like what you want and how you want this life to be, and you kind of have this internal stance that I'll sum up as like, it's like, who's in charge here? There's like inside of your mind, and it's like, who's in charge here when we let other people like infect our minds and make it bad, or we have an internal voice that drags us down and spirals us into, really dark places in one way or another. Or we look at the world. Yeah. And I don't love victimhood's a really interesting, tricky one, because I don't think people play victim consciously a lot of the time. They learn that this survival adaptation brings them good things in one way or another, while they'd have to absolutely delete the fact that they sacrifice the most important and most valid part of themselves, which is to be powerful and own like their internal experience. Victimhood it gets rid of all that. That's why it's really pernicious. But I understand why it catches on as a meme, and groups of people get together and do it together and promote it, and it's really tricky.
Yeah.
But That's a tricky one. We'll have to hash that one out for our last show. When we want to get canceled, we'll talk about victim culture,
Okay.
and then we'll poke all the hornets' nests and let them come for us, basically. Say we're
Sounds
just
good.
trying to help. They're like, no, we'll destroy you, and that's
Yeah,
kind of how
sounds
it
good.
goes these days. But
Yeah. And you know what's kind of interesting with that fourth
mm,
turning is the fact that the one generation, it seems like people have just been beating up the most, the Gen Y, the millennial generation,
mm,
we can blame this on them. We can blame people have been blaming a lot of things on the millennials.
I've been
According to the
feeling it, man.
yeah, according to the book, who's going to fix everything? Who's going to right the ship?
According to the book, yeah, it's us millennials that
It's the
will emerge
millennials.
as the leaders. That was what they said. And
Yeah,
I'm 37. I'm either the absolute top or almost the absolute top of millennial, I guess. And
right. Would you say
apparently
you
they
were
just
are you a senior millennial or what they call you?
they I think been a lot of
Geriatric?
they just they just change this. I am a geriatric millennial,
There you
cheers
go.
to that.
I laughed when I first
I'm
heard that. I'm like, really, geriatric? That's the best word they can come up with instead
yeah.
of, senior or experience. You're just one of the more experienced millennials.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, I think of it. I'm the kind of millennial where I'm at that age where it's like, hey, I'm tired. Keep it down. We're tired up here. Like that's how it goes mainly. So
all right.
it's a
Perfect.
big task from that book. But
Yeah.
I kind when I watched that video, I'm like, God, this is fascinating because I like the idea of organizing information and cyclical patterns and all this stuff, but they're also not prophecies, and these things can be changed too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of scary. The fourth turning, it seems like every fourth turn ends or involves a big war of some sort. So hopefully this one can be different.
All right.
You know, hopefully the pandemic's enough, but
Yeah.
certainly the world's tumultuous these days in other ways too.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
But I don't think it's
I
something we have to be doomed to. It just seems humans operate in this way and you can make a pattern out of it. But if humans operate a different way, then things
right.
can be different too.
Right. All right. Perfect. We talked because we're almost out of time here. We talked about
Mm.
potentially doing a silent outcome frame. Is that something you're interested as you think about it, or do you think we should hold that off for another show?
Sure. I mean, I can run people through something real quick. It's
Okay.
like, so if you think about all these major contexts in your life, what's most up for you? And we'll kind of have to do this quicker than it usually would happen in real life. But when you look at all these big parts of your life, like what's most burning, what's like most like trying to grab at your attention, what do you feel like you'd like to be different the most, is another way to put it. And once you have that, so you're like, all right, we'll just pick an example. It's like, all right, I want to be healthier. Okay, and how would you like to be healthier? Well, I want to wake up and run every morning. Okay, great. As an example. So for you, just think about what's going on and what you'd like to be different. And now this is really important, even though it may just feel not so much, but formally make a choice about what you would like instead of what you have, as if you making this choice wills it into existence. That's kind of the weight and the power I'd like to put behind it. So, about this thing in your life, what would you like? And that could either be really simple for you or that could be one of the toughest questions you've ever been asked. Just kind of depends. So you can pause this here if you don't have it, but I'll probably have to just move through this a bit quicker. But so great. So what you like is this. And when you have that, good thing. What will having that do for you? As in, what other secondary payoffs or movements towards something else will this provide? What will having this thing, when you have it now, what will having that do for you? And once you have that thing, it's like, okay, now that I have this, what will having this do for me? And you can ask this version, you can ask this a bunch of times till you kind of get to some sort of emotional ceiling of well-being, or a lot of times we're motivated by things we're not aware of. This question is really great for eliciting those as well, but we'll kind of move on. So about this good outcome that you would like, how will you know when you have it? Like, if you kind of if you make a picture of you having this thing in your life now, like mission accomplished style, how will you know when you have it? What are the indicators in your reality and in your life that this is real now? You just want to make note of that to kind of know when you're on track, or when you actually find yourself in the place where this kind of choice has become an internal choice, has become an external reality. And in case this outcome involves anyone else, you kind of want to dig into these questions like, where do you want this? When do you want it? If it has kind of a time stamp to it, and does it involve anyone else? Like, who else is going to be involved in this decision, in this choice for you? And take a moment and get clear about all that. Pause this podcast or this video and take all the time you need. And then when you're ready, and this is the real kicker, the real interesting question. So when you have what you would like, what might you lose that you value when you have it? And this question, we'll probably have to do an entire show about this concept, but in neurolinguistic programming, they call it the ecology of the change. If you think of yourself and your life as a system that has an ecological balance, when you change something, even for the positive, you change the ecology of it. You change the landscape of your map and your reality and just the way you put together life. So in psychology, they talk about even negative stuff. They have things they call secondary gains, secondary payoffs of negative experiences. They can be emotional. Sometimes they have physical manifestations. So we really just want to pay a lot of attention to, when you have this good thing, what negative things might come from it, what good things that you used to not notice came from the negative thing will go away. How might this impact other important people in your life, whether they're alive or they're past, specifically from family of origin and ancestry and our relationship with them. All this stuff needs to be considered. And this is why Ryan and I work with people in 2-hour sessions to change things, because there's a lot to kind of tool around in our inner psychology to make it an external reality that's much better. But that's where I would put it today. Look at your life, examine it deeply, whatever that means to you, as much time as that takes in major contexts. Choose one or two or three, or, don't blow yourself out so nothing happens, but still start with one. But you can do this with as many as you want. About the context, what would you like? If you could have it any way you want, what would you like? And then run through these questions about it. And then for a real world action step, make what's the smallest, tiniest action step you can take every day to make this happen, so that you get a win every day. Don't choose some huge goal that you have to work towards for 5 years and you get to celebrate for a day. Choose steps that will get you to where you want to be in 5 years and celebrate them every day.
Very nice. Thank you for
That's
running.
the 5-second gist of kind of the complexity of working with people's psychology. That's
And this is a nice, it's one of the things I like about this is it's something you as an individual, whoever you are out there watching, listening, can do on your own at any time. And the other thing I would say is just notice if you're in a position where you can actually verbalize out loud those answers. Sometimes you might get a different response hearing yourself say them. But if you're in a position where you don't want to verbalize it, we call it a silent outcome frame, is just kind of run through it and kind of notice what's going on internally. What sounds, what vision, or pictures do you see potentially? What stories are playing out in your mind? And it's a nice way to get kind of some insight what's going on with your system. So thank you for taking people through that.
Yeah, thank you. And that reminds me of God, I should have said this first. Here's the really important tip or hack. When you're thinking and running through positive things in your life, take note of any uh, negative feelings, negative voices, negative pictures, invalidating things that come up, the stuff that arises from your system when you think about a better thing happening. Those are the internal barriers that you can take to a therapist or a change worker or a somatic worker. So when you kind of meditate, or if you visualize or do anything like that, just really note how your system objects to positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where the work begins. That
Right.
it can be as simple as that, even though it can be potentially complex too.
Yeah, definitely. There's one we could do on money also. But we're going to save that for another time because we're out of time. It's the end of the show.
Yeah.
But we will be back next Tuesday with some more exciting information on how you can start living your authentic life, whether or not it's no fucks given or however it works best for you. That's great as long as you're moving towards what you want in life. Ultimately, that's what we're here to talk about. And I think the other thing is always, if you have questions, feel free to leave comments down below. We're always curious to know, what do you like? What didn't you like about the podcast, the program itself, so that we can improve and
Yeah.
make it better for your viewing and listening experience.
The more questions you ask, the less you have to hear Ryan and I talk. So if that's not motivating, I don't know what is. It would be a lot of fun to kind of do some real world work with people and answer some real questions.
Yeah.
And we're all kind of sitting here wondering if it can be better and get better. And I think, we say yes here. So keep tuning in if that sounds, interesting to you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. With that, it's always fun, sir.
It is. I'm really enjoying this. So thank you, Ryan, and thank you out there for participating with us wherever you are. Until next time.